I couldn't believe how everything had led to this. How did I end up here, with him? A millionaire sheik, a man I never thought I would end up in bed with, while my husband caught us both in the act. I never thought I could cheat. I loved my husband. We'd been together for nearly 10 years, and at first, everything was perfect. But as time went on, something changed. The emotions faded, and his absence became the norm. I felt alone, even though I had a man by my side. I don't even know what made me do it. Can I blame only myself? Or was it the unfulfilled dreams, the lack of passion and excitement in my life? That day started like any other. I'd made dinner, he had been late, again, and I was left alone, wondering if things were ever going to go back to the way they used to be. It all started with a simple invitation. The sheik was charming, his presence magnetic. I never imagined I would be drawn into his world, but his allure was undeniable. He was everything my husband wasn't. Rich, confident, and intriguing. It wasn't supposed to happen, but it did. We met at a business event, one of those fancy galas where you're supposed to network, but I couldn't focus on anything except the way he looked at me. His eyes were piercing, but there was something warm in them, something that made me feel seen. Not the way my husband used to look at me, but with an intensity that stirred something deep inside. "I've been watching you," he said, his voice smooth like velvet. I didn't know how to react, but I was already caught in his gaze. "You look tired. How long has it been since you felt truly alive?" I didn't know how to answer, so I just smiled awkwardly, unsure of what he meant. But his words stayed with me, lingering in my mind long after the event ended. I couldn't shake the feeling. The way he made me feel important, the way he seemed to care in a way my husband never did anymore. And then came the phone call. It wasn't planned, but before I knew it, I found myself agreeing to meet him. The hotel room was grand, luxurious in a way I'd only ever seen in magazines. I couldn't even believe I was standing there. His touch was gentle at first, but there was an urgency in the way he kissed me, the way his hands explored every inch of me. It was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I told myself it was a mistake, a one-time thing, but as we lay there together, my mind raced and I realized something. Maybe this wasn't just about physical pleasure. Maybe it was something deeper, something I hadn't been willing to admit to myself. And then came that moment, the one that would change everything. The moment when my husband walked into that room, catching us in the most compromising position imaginable. He stood there, frozen, his eyes wide in disbelief. I could feel the shock in his gaze, the anger, the betrayal. The sheik didn't flinch. He stood tall, his presence as commanding as ever. "Is this what you've been doing behind my back?" My husband's voice cracked. It was the first time in a long time that I'd seen him so vulnerable. I opened my mouth to explain, to beg for forgiveness, but no words came out. The guilt washed over me in waves, but I was too ashamed to speak. The silence after he walked in felt like it stretched on forever. My heart was racing in my chest, pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything else. My husband, standing there frozen, his eyes locked on me, filled with disbelief, was the only thing I could focus on. I felt like I was suffocating. This wasn't real. This couldn't be happening. The sheik stood beside me, calm and collected as always, his eyes cool, as though this was all part of some strange game he was playing. But it wasn't a game for me. This was my life falling apart. I wanted to speak. I wanted to apologize, to explain that this had gone too far, that it wasn't what it seemed, but the words wouldn't come. I just stood there, naked in front of both of them, feeling more exposed than I ever had in my life. My husband, the man I had vowed to spend my life with, was watching me like I was a stranger, like I was someone he didn't even recognize. The sheik, however, didn't seem fazed. He simply looked over at my husband and said, "She's been unhappy. I'm just here to help her see the truth." His voice was smooth, almost reassuring, as if this whole thing wasn't a betrayal, as if it was just an unfortunate turn of events. It took me a few seconds to process his words. He wasn't just calm. He was arrogant. He was claiming ownership of me, as if my life, my choices, didn't matter. "Get out," my husband finally managed to say, his voice shaking with anger, but it was clear that the shock was still sinking in. "I want you both out of my house." The Sheikh didn't move, his stance unyielding. He wasn't scared. He wasn't even bothered. It was like he didn't even see my husband as a threat. And that's when I realized he wasn't afraid of losing me. He had already won. He had me. After a long, tense silence, my husband finally turned around and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. I felt a deep pit open up in my stomach. I was left with the Sheikh alone, in the room we had just shared this forbidden moment. I couldn't look at him. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how I felt anymore. The guilt, the shame, everything mixed into a nauseating swirl inside me. What had I done? What had I allowed myself to become? He walked toward me, his steps slow and deliberate. I wanted to pull away, to escape, but my legs wouldn't move. I couldn't run from this moment. I couldn't pretend it hadn't happened. And somehow I knew that neither of us was leaving until he got what he came for. "Don't worry," he said, his voice a soft murmur as he reached out to touch my arm. "This isn't over. He won't leave you, not yet. But you can't go back to the way things were. You'll never see him the same way again." I wanted to argue. I wanted to scream that this wasn't what I wanted, that this wasn't me. But the way he spoke, the way his words seemed so certain, shook me. Maybe he was right. Maybe everything had already changed. Over the next few days, I couldn't escape the weight of what had happened. My husband barely spoke to me. His silence was louder than any words he could have said. He avoided my eyes when I tried to talk to him, when I tried to apologize. And the Sheikh? He kept calling me, sending me messages. He didn't want me to forget what happened. He was keeping me in his grip, reminding me of the control he had over me. I didn't know what to do. My heart was torn. Part of me wanted to go back to the life I had with my husband, the one I had known for years, the stability, the comfort. But another part of me, the part that had been awakened by the Sheikh's presence, the part that felt alive in a way I hadn't in so long, couldn't stop thinking about him. One afternoon, as I sat alone in the house, my mind racing, I got a text from the Sheikh. "Come to me. Let me show you what real freedom feels like." I didn't even hesitate. I grabbed my keys and left. When I arrived at his penthouse, the grandeur of the place struck me. It was nothing like the life I had known with my husband. Everything was sleek, elegant, and intimidating. He opened the door before I could knock, as if he knew I would come. He led me inside, a knowing smile on his face. "You're here now," he said, as if he had been expecting me all along. His words were calm, but there was a fire behind them. I could feel it in the air, like the anticipation of something I wasn't sure I was ready for. I stood there, feeling small in comparison to him. Everything about this felt wrong, yet so enticing. He motioned for me to sit, and I did, my hands trembling slightly. He poured us both drinks, and we sat in silence for a moment, the tension building between us. "I told you," he said finally, his voice low, "you can't go back now. You've crossed a line, and there's no turning around. But you have a choice. Stay with him, stay in the life you knew, or come with me and experience something you never thought you would." I looked at him, my mind clouded with confusion, guilt, and desire. I didn't know what to do. But something inside me whispered, "This is the point of no return." And I was standing at the edge, unsure whether to take the step. I stood in his penthouse, every inch of me pulled in two directions. The Sheikh's presence was overwhelming, but so was the thought of my husband, the man I had loved for so long. I had crossed a line, and now there was no going back. No matter what I decided, everything had already changed. The Sheikh's words echoed in my mind, "You can't go back now." And he was right. The moment my husband caught us, everything was shattered. What we once had, the trust, the shared history, was gone. I knew that. But what was left for me? Was it the life I had known? Or was it this new, dangerous world where excitement and uncertainty reigned? I had never felt more lost. The phone buzzed in my pocket, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was a message from my husband. "We need to talk." I stared at the words for a long time, trying to decipher what they meant. Was it an invitation to try and repair what was broken, or was it a final goodbye? I couldn't bear to face him, not with the weight of what I had done, but at the same time, I knew I couldn't stay here, in this world of uncertainty, with a man who saw me as nothing more than an object of desire. I stood up abruptly, ignoring the Sheikh's concerned look. My heart was torn, but I knew what I had to do. "I have to go," I whispered, more to myself than to him. He didn't say anything at first, but I could see the understanding in his eyes. He knew. He had known from the beginning that this moment would come. "Go," he said softly. "But remember, you'll always be mine." I didn't answer. I simply walked out, feeling his gaze on my back as I left. When I got home, the house was quiet. Too quiet. My husband was waiting for me in the living room, his face etched with frustration and pain. The air between us felt thick, suffocating. I stood there for a moment, unsure of where to begin. But he spoke first, his voice surprisingly calm. "I don't know what to say," he started. "I thought I knew you. I thought I knew us." I could feel my heart breaking all over again as I sat across from him. "I never wanted to hurt you," I said, my voice cracking. "I don't know what happened. But I was lost." He stared at me, his eyes searching, as if he was trying to find the woman he had married in the person sitting before him. "And now?" he asked quietly. I swallowed hard, tears welling up in my eyes. "I don't know. I don't know if I can fix this. I don't know if you can forgive me." There was a long silence. It felt like everything in my life was hanging in the balance, waiting for his next words. "I don't know if I can," he finally said. "But I want to try." The days that followed were full of uncertainty. My husband and I barely spoke, and when we did, it was like we were strangers to each other. The trust that had once been the foundation of our relationship was shattered, and no matter how hard we tried to put the pieces back together, it never felt the same. I couldn't stop thinking about the Sheikh. His words, his touch, had awakened something inside me that I hadn't realized was missing. But now, I was faced with a choice. Stay with my husband, the man who was trying to forgive me, or go back to the Sheikh, the man who made me feel alive in a way I had never felt before. But I couldn't have both. And then, one night, I received a final message from the Sheikh. It was simple. "You've made your choice. I hope it was the right one." I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone, the weight of my decision pressing down on me. I had to choose. And as much as I wanted to escape into the world he offered, I knew deep down that I couldn't. The person I was, the life I had built with my husband, was worth fighting for. I put my phone down, took a deep breath, and walked to my husband, who was sitting alone in the living room. He didn't look up at first, but when I sat beside him, he finally turned to me. His eyes were tired, but there was a flicker of hope in them. "I'm here," I said softly. "I'm here, and I want to try." We spent the next few weeks trying to rebuild what had been broken. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick. There were moments of doubt, moments where it seemed like the walls between us were too high to climb. But with time, we slowly started to reconnect, to find our way back to each other. And though I couldn't undo what had happened, I knew I had made the right choice. The Sheikh was a chapter one would never forget, but it was a chapter that had to close. I had learned something about myself, about what I truly wanted, and about the person I wanted to be. But it was my husband, the man who had stuck by me through everything, who deserved my loyalty, my love. In the end, the life I had with him, messy and imperfect as it was the one I wanted to fight for. And I knew, no matter what, that I had to choose him.